I want to begin just by thanking everybody for coming and for your interest in the curriculum redesign. And also to tell you that I want to make this session be as flexible and aligned with your interests in the curriculum redesign as possible. So I wonder if you could raise your hand if you've read the framework document. It's about, I think, maybe 50-50. So let me propose something and see if this sounds good. I have a slide deck here that summarizes the proposal, and then also I'll introduce to you the leadership of the Curriculum Redesign Working Group, with whom I want to make sure that you have a conversation. And if it would work for the folks here, maybe I should do a brief sort of high-level introduction of the curriculum, you know, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, something like that, to make sure we're all on the page. And then why don't I, you know, sort of take your questions and hear your ideas and hear your concerns, and we'll emphasize the things that you want to hear about, knowing that I think of this as a work in progress. And it's really important to us to not only design a curriculum to start in 2015 that is consistent with the latest in medical education, that suits the needs of our population, and that you know, sort of delivers the kind of curriculum that we all envision we can deliver, but also that it's a curriculum that's perfectly matched to the strengths of Geisel and you know, sort of the way we do things here. And so we've had several committees of the curriculum redesign, each addressing a different piece of the curriculum, and then all working in concert together to make sure that their planning is well interdigitated. And those committees all have student representation, faculty representation, often mixtures of scientists and clinicians together to make sure that the integration that we really want to accomplish is in place. But we really view these conversations in town halls and in the forums to come in the coming weeks, the dates of which I'll put up at the end, the emails we get from you, et cetera, as an opportunity to take the model that we've created and improve it. Because, you know, I think we have great ideas, and there are great people on the teams, and you'll meet them tonight. But, you know, this conversation is how we make sure that the model is correct, and that there's not some blind spot in that we're thinking, or something about the way we're putting it that's unclear, that we have an intention that hasn't really sort of made it through in the document that we have. So I want to make sure that we have a good interactive discussion, and it's not just me up here talking. So what we'll talk about today is I want to talk a little bit about why we think that this proposal for a curriculum redesign is right for Geisel, while it capitalizes on the strengths of our institution. Also, I want to talk about timeline and milestones, where we are in the process and what to expect from the model that we're talking about now, as well as of next steps. And then at a very high level altitude, I'll talk about the curriculum framework and highlight, you know, maybe a half dozen features of it that are, you know, sort of new and changed, different from the current curriculum. But I'm going to leave a lot of the details to our conversation. That's in the framework document. I have slides related to it here so that as we get to it, we can sort of flip back and forth to those slides. So in our conversation tonight, we'll be talking about multiple parts of the curriculum, and they're listed here, you know, the core biomedical curriculum, the clinical and longitudinal curriculum, the healthcare evaluation and innovation curriculum, and so on. Each of these is designed to address a particular priority in medical education. For instance, in the core biomedical curriculum, we want to make sure that Geisel students have an outstanding foundation in the foundational sciences that's clinically relevant and taught by teams of clinicians and investigators who are working together in concert. That's one piece of it. Each of these has specific characteristics to them, but what I'll do is I'll talk about some of the overarching themes that run across all of these parts of the curriculum. And then if you'd like to hear more about clinical immersion training, for instance, happy to talk about more details than I present in this introductory piece. So why are we doing this? Why redesign our curriculum. We already have outstanding students. We have outstanding relationships with our students, and you know, our students get great board scores and they place well in residencies. So why make a change? Well, one, we recognize that medical practice is changing, that in the last 10, 20 years in particular, but you know, progressively for the last 100 years, the nature of medical practice is really different. That we are no longer solo practitioners handling acute issues that arise episodically, but more and more practice is occurring as a longitudinal, outpatient-heavy practice that is done in the setting of multidisciplinary teams, that a primary care physician would be coordinating multiple specialists, working with providers of different sorts to deliver a multifaceted care for the patient, and that this sort of widely distributed team-based care is something that we need to prepare students for in our medical education. One important theme that has emerged in that you know, we're all, I think, coming to grips with in the change in medical care is that our population is aging and that our patients are more and more frequently burdened with chronic illness and even multiple chronic illnesses. And so sort of managing these complicated patients is something our students need to be able to do effectively. We also have learned a lot about effective medical education, that you know, we have lots of great ways of teaching here at Geisel. And in addition, we also know that there are active learning and engaged learning techniques, such as small group, interactive learning, such as learning that focuses on problem solving, learning that's student-centered. The students grapple with the problem and have to go out and search on their own to try to answer a question and then come back and teach each other about it. That really, if you, not only is there excellent evidence now suggesting that that kind of teaching is highly effective at improving student retention of material, but also, I can't prove this, but I believe that a student who learns to thrive in a curriculum that requires that kind of work, that kind of critical thinking, that kind of active learning is going to be better prepared for the critical thinking and active problem solving of clinical practice. And in fact, curricula at medical school who have changed their curricula over to this sort of problem-based work have shown some improvements in students' ability to engage in critical thinking in the clinical setting. So we want to build that sort of evidence-based teaching into our curriculum and augment the great things about the curriculum already. This is something that our regulatory bodies like the LCME have noticed, and they increasingly require this of us. They recently visited us, and they were really impressed with a lot of the aspects of our teaching here, but they did encourage us to increasingly de-emphasize passive lecture-based learning and really enhance the use of this kind of active and engaged learning. And so this is something that we not only want to do and believe is right, but it is something that we must do. We recognize this not only because of the LCME requirements, but because we conducted our own assessment of our needs, and we had outside experts come in and sort of be unbiased reviewers of our curriculum, and all of the recommendations really align. So it feels to us that the time is right to address objectives along these lines. So what are the specific objectives that we think are important to cover? One, we want to make sure that students really have active learning experiences, that they spend less time sitting passively, hearing information and learning to reiterate it, and instead grappling with a problem, thinking through something, developing hypotheses. And we want to make sure that as they're doing that, they're doing it with material that's really highly integrated between the clinical and basic sciences, that teams of scientists and clinicians are working together to make sure that foundational scientific material is clearly clinically relevant and the students get why they're learning it, and also that the clinical material the students are learning has a strong foundation in foundational science so they understand the why of what they're doing in their practice. We want to make sure that the students experience the kind of longitudinal, largely outpatient, multidisciplinary practice in medical school that they will experience as attendings. We also want to make sure that our students are not only great practitioners and scholarly practitioners, but they're also leaders, that they understand our healthcare system, that they know how to evaluate it, to innovate within it, and to lead in it. Importantly, we understand that medical practice is challenging, that that a life in medicine is something that involves stress and challenges, and we want to make sure that the students receive specific skills training to prepare them for that. This involves medical ethics training. This involves training in effective communication and empathy with students. It also involves the skills and practice resilience that allow them to be able to really thrive despite the stresses of a medical practice. And we believe that this occurs most effectively in the context of mentorship. So I'll talk in a second about how to realize these goals in the format of a curriculum. But I wanted to briefly talk about how we think this kind of a curriculum really capitalizes on the strengths of what Geisel is. So one thing that our graduates consistently tell us, and also our students, sort of really say is a strength of this institution that brought them here, is our close-knit community. Students really get to know the faculty. It's the kind of thing where it's not sort of some stranger up at the front, but the person they had dinner with, the person they saw in the grocery store. We want to make sure that the linkages between students and faculty are even stronger by having lots of longitudinal, sort of long-standing intensive relationships between students and faculty in this curriculum, and we'll describe how. We live in the live free or die state. I think it's hardwired in to value critical thinking here, and we want to make sure that we emphasize this in our curriculum. I believe that learning that emphasizes lecture and sort of the assimilation of facts is not likely to foster that critical learning as effectively as problem-solving, critical thinking exercises that require the students to engage on their own with the material and come back and teach about it and problem solve. That's one major reason why we think the case-based teaching approach is going to be very important. Our foundational sciences are really strong, and our students consistently talk about the dedication of the faculty and the excellence of the teaching they receive in that time. We want to make sure that we can enhance this by improving the educational methods that we use during those relationships, but keeping those relationships strong. Lastly, Geisel is home to the Dartmouth Institute, a world-renowned institute in healthcare delivery sciences, and we want to make sure that in this curriculum we leverage that strength by taking advantage of the expertise that we have locally, knowing that as our students enter an increasingly complicated medical practice environment, the understanding what the system that they're in is key to being able to change and lead within it. So, where are we in the process? So very importantly, this is early on. What we're doing now is, since we really valued having a conversation with the faculty, we wanted to make sure that we put a draft model out before the faculty so that we could discuss it and realize that this piece of the model is excellent and something that we all really feel strongly about and agree about, whereas another piece might need improvement as we learn more about what you think is ideal for for Geisel to use as a model of teaching. And so in order to facilitate that process, we've configured this in sort of a three-stage approach. This first stage now we think of as framework design, where we think about these objectives, formulate a framework for the full curriculum, and then bring it to you to say, is this the right direction for us to be taking as an institution? Does this fit what Geisel can do best? Knowing that now is a great time to make the kind of adjustments that we get on the basis of faculty feedback, so that we don't get to some place where off in some dark room someplace, 10 or 15 people without the contact with the faculty design something that's an awesome idea on paper, but not right for this institution in this era. So what we're bringing forward to the faculty now is not something that has every detail worked out, every course session scheduled, every course director appointed yet, but more, is this direction the direction do you agree that we should take as an institution? And if you agree, if that's the kind of thing that feels right for us and resonates with our priorities as an institution, then we say, okay, let's enter into the next phase of development, where we say, okay, we've agreed that there will be this course and this semester of the second year. Now let's get together the team of clinicians and basic scientists who will work together to design the details of that course. When will that session occur, et cetera. So that will occur from 2013 to 2014. And then another vote of the Medical Education Committee occurs to say, is that syllabus a correct representation of what we voted on the year before? And is that sort of, meet the high standards that they have for the current courses that they review on a regular basis? Then we'll have one more year of curriculum redesign where the curriculum that's now been approved by the faculty and approved by the Medical Education Committee then moves forward into implementation. Once you have all these syllabi designed, then you have to ready the rooms and ready the faculty and ready the admissions committee process so that in 2015, when the new curriculum begins, every little detail is worked out logistically. Does that make sense? So for this first level tier, what I'll do is I'll show I think 2 slides here, and I'll just depict the curriculum at a high level, and I'll call out some pieces of it, and then let's let the conversation begin. First, we envision the new curriculum occurring in 3 phases. And each of these phases has some resemblance to the existing curriculum, but there's some important differences that I want to call out. So first, students enter into medical school and they are sort of welcomed into the practice of medicine. And a key step in that is that students need to be able to acquire deep understanding of the foundational sciences that are the underpinning for modern clinical practice. Importantly, however, we want to make sure that from the very beginning, from the first months of medical school, that the students experience clinical medicine firsthand, not as just an observer, but as a real clinician participating in a team of providers in the clinic. And so to achieve that, we'll have a clinical immersion experience that begins in the 2nd month of medical school, and that in which students follow a panel of patients 3 times a month in a primary care clinic with an optional 4th time a month in another clinic in a different specialty. And they will follow a panel of patients with their mentor over the course of this phase of the curriculum. This phase of the curriculum that clinical immersion part of the curriculum will also involve facilitated small group sessions that will sort of bring out some of the clinical skills that the students are learning in a fashion that's coordinated with the rest of the phase 1 of the curriculum, which we'll show to you in a little more detail in a second. Next, there's the 2nd phase of the curriculum, phase 2, clinical immersion training. This is analogous to the current clerkships, but it has one important difference, which is this burgundy stripe of the foundational sciences. We all have experienced, and we continue to hear from our students, that by the time the students have really rotated through many of the rotations, they're beginning to get a little bit foggy about some of the foundational sciences that they learned earlier in the curriculum, even if they recognize the importance of these to the whys of clinical practice. Well, I think we can improve on this by embedding in these clinical immersion experiences foundational sciences that are team taught by investigators and clinicians. So for instance, if a student was rotating on the OBGYN immersion rotation, they would have some time set aside during the course of that week so that they can again have problem-based, interactive, active learning type of a session with faculty that share expertise in clinical medicine and relevant things such as hormonal physiology in that case. So this is a really important way of keeping the foundational sciences running throughout the clinical years. In phase 3, differentiation and exploration, students are becoming more the kind of physician that they envision. They may be choosing to be an internist or a pathologist or a surgeon. And so they're choosing rotations that are particular to their specialty. However, there are common themes in the experience in that phase that all students would have. One, all students would have a required sub-I. And all students would have a new rotation that I'll describe next that is one of our ways of embedding the foundational sciences in this phase of the curriculum too. So let me show a little bit more in the way of detail of that, and then let's just open it up for a conversation, and we can go as deep into a particular portion of the curriculum as you'd like. Okay, so here is a 48-month-long diagram of the curriculum. Our intent is for all students to be able to complete the curriculum in 48 months as they would currently. Should students elect to take a longer course of time, a fair percentage of our graduates do so in more than 4 years. That's absolutely fine still. The curriculum would begin with Foundations in Medicine. The idea is to, one, introduce students to the seminal conceptual themes that are going to run through the curriculum. We recognize that some of our students come from a basic science background, some of them come from a liberal arts background, and there's some work to be done in just getting them up to the same page so that they can really thrive in the later parts of the core biomedical curriculum. We also recognize that not all students are going to have experience with the kind of interactive, active learning that we're going to emphasize here, that they may not have had that sort of approach in college, and that really to get the most out of this approach, you have to get how it works. And so in Foundations in Medicine, we would begin case-based teaching, but it would be with a little bit lower intensity and with explicit guidance on this is how you do this, this is how you unpack a case, this is how you pursue learning objectives in this context, this is how your learning is going to happen, so that they understand the process when they hit the core biomedical curriculum. It's also a time for the students to get introduced to some of the basic clinical skills that they're going to need in their clinical immersion experiences. How do you do vitals? How do you say hi to a patient and get them into a room? How do you be an effective member of that team when they hit the clinics in the clinical immersion curriculum? Next, after about 6 weeks, they'll hit the core biomedical curriculum, and we can show you the multiple different courses that are a part of that. But just a word about the shape of it. So there would be 7 different courses, 6 different courses within the core biomedical curriculum, each a cross-departmental course that would be taught by multiple faculty from different fields. So for instance, I'm the course director of the SBM Infectious Diseases course, and Paula Sundstrom is the director for microbiology, and she and I would collaborate together as opposed to having sort of separate courses where we're a little bit aware of what each other does, but it's not, I don't really have any say over what you do, and likewise in mine, that we would actually work together and say, what material do we need to deliver in concert together? And we would work together, for instance, with our colleagues in immunology so that as we're talking about a particular infection, we could also collaborate with them to develop sessions around the immune defense against that and around immunopathogenesis in that infection. So cross-departmental courses taught by teams. At the same time, during this phase 1, the students would be in this longitudinal, clinical and longitudinal curriculum in which they would have one afternoon a week in that small group mentored discussion and seeing patients. Students also would, at this early part of the curriculum, engage in the healthcare evaluation and innovation curriculum. This is a curriculum around the evaluation of the healthcare system, creating change and innovation in the healthcare system, leadership skills in healthcare, data analysis and critical thinking in complex healthcare systems. As the students progress through this curriculum, then they would hit phase 2, which is inaugurated by clinical skills intercession. This is sort of a welcome to immersion experiences where students get the basic clinical skills they need to be able to thrive in full-time clinical practice. So for instance, they would, perhaps learn some procedural skills, how to do IVs, learn how to do basic life support, some of the basic skills you need before you hit the wards and the clinics full-time. In addition, they would have some advanced training in communication skills, knowing that that's really important. And we also envision embedding some additional advanced professionalism skills, some advanced clinical ethics of a sort in different topics they haven't seen beforehand. Then the students hit clerkships that are, you notice, similar features to the one that they have today, medicine, surgery, OBGYN. But there are a couple of differences I want to highlight. One is that the students would have geriatrics and ambulatory medicine and neurology, 2 currently required clerkships of the 4th year, embedded in this phase 2 of the curriculum. These are bedrock rotations that we wanted to make sure the students have early exposure to. And so students would, this might be one student's order of rotations, another one might start with one of those two after the clinical skills intercession. Another thing to point out is that the core biomedical curriculum doesn't come to a screeching halt here. That, as I mentioned, in each of these clerkships, there would be embedded time set aside so that the students can have clinically relevant experiences in foundational sciences that are linked to the clinical training that they're doing in those immersion clerkships. And those, much like the core biomedical curriculum earlier, would be team taught. Then the students transition into phase 3. Phase 3 begins with the skills evaluation intercession, in which the skills that the students have been acquiring through the clerkships are queried in an interactive simulation center-based experience. So that, you know, if we want to evaluate whether the students can recognize that a dyspneic patient with crackles on examination and a gallop has heart failure, we would present them with a case and sort of see if they can make the right steps in management. Do they diurese? Do they, you know, get an echo, et cetera? We also envision querying communication and professionalism skills. The students might be presented with a patient who has been given, to whom they need to give a bad diagnosis, or perhaps there's a difficult decision where two people are disagreeing about management in the family, and so how are they going to manage that communication? We could have, you know, actors in the simulation center querying the students' skills in this regard. Then students hit the 4th year. A couple of key differences to highlight, and then we'll have our discussion. One, all students will have required sub-internships. As they do now, the nature of the sub-internship will be appropriate to the patient's career goals. If they want to go in medicine, pediatric surgery, et cetera, that's what they'll choose to do their clerkships in. Newly, however, all students will do the integrated acute care rotation, in which they will care for patients in the spectrum of care from acute care, the emergency room, through to the ICUs, complicated, rapidly evolving multi-system patients. But again, this training would have embedded time in the course of the week where they would have foundational sciences taught in the ED or in the ICU by teams of faculty, foundational scientists and clinicians. Students will, this year will be interwoven with several elective months, much as the students have now. And then in the spring, as they do now, the students would have a capstone course. Currently, there are 3 capstone courses: HSP, Health Society and the Physician, Advanced Medical Sciences, and Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics. And we envision that this capstone course would take traits of those courses, but it would be modified in response to the fact that the curriculum before this capstone is different. And we want to leave the design of that a little bit flexible so that as the details of the clerkship design emerges over the coming year, that we can sort of flex the nature of that to suit it. But one thing that we wanted to prioritize in this is scholarly work. We know that especially the healthcare evaluation and innovation curriculum and the clinical and longitudinal curriculum anticipate required scholarly projects for the students to engage with. This would be for the students who, for all students, and then more in depth for those students who elect to do the master's program. And in the capstone course here at the end of their medical school career, we anticipate this is a great opportunity for the students to present their scholarly work and sort of bring those projects to a close and transition it to their successor, we hope, and the next student to succeed them in that work. So I hope that gives you a sense of some of the ideas, and many of the details are in the framework that we've emailed and handed out, and happy to get into those details now. And I want to, can I ask for the curriculum redesign leadership to come forward and join me at the green table, and let's just pass the microphone around and see what comes up. One thing, since this is live streaming and being videoed so that those who weren't able to come tonight can see it offline, I want to make sure that we have the questions asked into a microphone, or at least that we repeat it for you. And so I know Carrie has a microphone, and she can bring it to you as you need. So Fire away. What are you curious about? Yes, sir.
How are you going to accommodate different learning styles in this curriculum? Because you're really emphasizing small group learning here.
Tell me more what you're thinking about, Peter.
Well, we've seen students over the years who don't do well with lectures, and they don't do well with small groups, they don't do well in laboratory, and they require all kinds of help, or different kinds of help.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, we know it's not cookie cutter education, so
Yeah.
What do you envision as a way to really help those different students?
That's great. So how to sort of adapt the curriculum to meet a diverse set of learning approaches to the students. Maybe Leslie, I can ask you to talk about how the diversity of approaches that we have in this curriculum would be appropriate to that.
Sure, great. Hi, Peter. Good question. So the Medical Education Learning Design subgroup led by Glenda and I, is really tasked with keeping a close eye on the pedagogical aspects of the new curriculum. So one of the things that we're building in that's not really seen in some of these diagrams is really keeping a very close eye on all of our students as learners, as well as our students as teachers. So the intent will be that as the students come in and enter into the curriculum, we'll have some degree of assessment similar to what the core resilience curriculum will be doing as well. Some assessments of students' learning styles, the ways that they've succeeded in courses prior, the way that they're looking to medical school, and then really using that first foundational core block in the beginning to really better understand what their needs are, as well as helping inculcate them in sort of the Geisel way of teaching. We've met with a lot of the leaders at Tuck, for example, who have a curriculum that looks similar to this in terms of the way that the learning is designed, and recognize that there's a lot that needs to happen in those first couple of weeks of medical school to really better understand the student and help them understand better how to learn and how to succeed here. And then that will continue through, and I'm sort of stepping on Anne's toes a little bit here, but I'll keep going with this, is with a fairly intense coaching mentoring program in which every student will have their own sort of mentor coach, whether that will be through the clinical longitudinal curriculum or something else, but really somebody who's not the person who's going to be giving them their assessment at the end, but someone whose job is really to coach them through. And then that way we can continue the individualized methods as we go. Clearly every course and every clerkship is going to be teaching a bit more than to the individual student, but the intent is for them to have sort of that longitudinal relationship with a coach, but also for us to be looking at them as learners as well as teachers.
You sort of got into my follow-up question, which was where are you going to find all these mentors, and how are you going to train them to do this kind of stuff and match up the students with appropriate mentors? Because already we're having all kinds of problems finding enough people to take the longitudinal students.
So that's your very first question is a great one. I'll, to some extent, even turn that back over to others who are looking at that as well. We've been paying attention to that and talking to other medical schools that have similar programs set up to better understand what are the FTE needs for that, who are the best people to serve as mentors, and how do we build that into the curriculum so that it's somebody that the student feels comfortable with throughout their 4 years here. How are we training them? That's actually a lot of the work that I've been doing the last couple of years in terms of the whole concept of clinical coaching and coaching for careers. And so we're actually piloting that project right now and intend to blend that with the work that, that Anne and Craig are doing in terms of training people. And then, I'm sorry, your last one was, there were 3 parts to your question.
Where are you going to find them? Well,
no, I hit the where you find them, how do you train them, and...
Well, how are you going to match them up?
Matching up, you know, I think that's a good question. I think we need to, I can't give you a good answer to that right now, other than it's something we'll need to be paying attention to. And having had to do this, for example, as a residency director and matching the right resident to the right, you know, advisor in residency, is there will always be some iteration there. You'll get some good matches, you'll get some not great matches, and you just have to build into the program to make sure it's something you're paying attention to and blending people with the right people as you go along.
Just to follow up to the who's and what's, I recognize for a long time as we've exploded our student numbers and we have 70,000 people in the Upper Valley, the dispersion of medical education beyond and well beyond, and having placed students in pediatrics. So the issue about manpower, when Harvard does it, when Hofstra does it, is very different than ours. Because at the other side, I look at the clinical engine, putting absolutely, and I don't know who's here, but I'll say it, putting no rewards for taking on these roles. So at some very high level, you're having to grapple with this and change the reward system and the time in clinic. So teaching time is not only resident teaching time. Can you give us just a glimmer of the progress?
That's a great question. I think there are sort of two levels to come at this. One is about culture. I think we're all under a lot of pressure, and I think this is true of clinicians who are under increasing RVU pressure, but also true of investigators for whom the NIH pay lines are just falling by the day. And so how amid those increasing pressures do we have a culture that really values teaching? How do we, setting aside the financial support piece of it, how do we make sure that the promotions process values it, that the kind of the conversation among the faculty recognizes the importance of those who really invest in teaching? How is it that Leslie Fall's Office of Faculty Development really can support the teachers in their efforts to acquire the skills and be more effective? How can the Academy of Master Educators support that work too? And that's something that as you know, there have been changes in the promotion process. Leslie's new office and position is designed to do that. So we really hope to change that conversation over time, knowing that it will not get easy, but at least we can try to change the support for it, the culture around it. The other piece has to do with financial support. We know that all faculty members are expected to do teaching, and that's an obligation we all take on gladly. But there is sort of a threshold that you cross where the depth of your teaching involvement is so substantial that really it's appropriate for funding to occur to offset that time. This is, I think, true of people who have major investments in time, course directors, for instance. And so there is funds in the Office of Medical Education to support those who invest heavily in teaching like that. And importantly, one common question is that in the curriculum that we're talking about, small group teaching is being emphasized. And we recognize that if you take a group of 90, 85 students and divide them up into a bunch of pieces, that's going to be, to a certain extent, more time with faculty. And so how do we support that? We envision that's going to be a mixture of faculty who are, doing that teaching as part of their obligations as being faculty member, and also faculty too who are spending 0.4 or 0.5 FTE in teaching and being supported for that.
I didn't hear you say a dialogue with department chairman about what they're putting out in their department. If there's a missing ingredient, there's a missing ingredient. It's starting much earlier with a very active dialogue with chairmen who have both a clinical and an academic responsibility about that. When I listen across departments, I don't think the student teaching and the chairman are hearing that yet.
Yeah, so that's sort of a how question. If we know that we want the culture to value teaching, and we know that in appropriate instances that teaching is supported financially, how would we realize that dream? Clearly, the department chairs are a really big piece of that. Fortunately, our group has met with the multiple leadership bodies, including them, and we've received really great support from the chairs for this work. So we believe that they're going to be supportive of the logistical implications of it. Jim?
I want to ask about the Phase 2, specifically the core biomedical curriculum sliver that's down there at the bottom. And I don't know if it's supposed to be a base supporting all the others, but that's where it is. So my question is that envisioned to be, and maybe this is too detailed and you just don't know, where all the medical students come for a similar core biomedical curriculum, or within each clerkship there's a specific curriculum that's relevant for that clerkship? Is that sorted out yet?
The conversation has begun in that regard. And in fact, currently a couple of clerkships are looking at doing pilots of this kind of thing to see how it would work on a clerkship, particularly some of the clerkships that have a critical mass, fewer sites, a critical mass of students. In doing some of these group, more or less modified problem-based learning on appropriate to that particular clerkship. So perhaps in medicine it might be might be a case of complicated DKA or something like that. Whereas in surgery it might relate to shock or septic shock or something more relevant to a surgical specialty. But the process is beginning, particularly with the idea of doing some pilots to see how effective they are, how well they educate students, and how students respond to those kind of exercises. In place of, for example, many students are brought to resident teaching programs as part of their regular experience. Well, they go see the resident lecturer, which happens to be a part of a series that they're dropping into, parachuting into, and sit there going, this is, what am I getting out of this as a student? If instead you can run some kind of group exercise with, the 5 or 6 students that happen to be at DH on medicine, that really is problem-based, and bring them back for a wrap-up later in the week or the following week, and do the same, and do the kind of wrap-up that's done with problem-based exercises, you can introduce it.
Can I ask a follow-up then? Do you envision that core biomedical curriculum being led or mentored by clinicians associated with the clerkship they're in, or do you then bring in the basic scientists to do that? And the reason I ask that is that if you're going to bring in the basic scientists to do that, it looks to me like they have to come in 8 times if they have one shot, say, per clerkship, and do it again and again and again. And that might be a challenge to get them to come in to do that.
Let me start with this, and I can pass this along. But with problem-based learning exercises, as you probably know, they're based around cases,
Yes.
and these are what we're envisioning is somewhat modified problem-based learning, between that and case-based learning. But regardless, most of the intellectual activity on the part of the instructors is done ahead of time as far as preparing, identifying appropriate cases, identifying the objectives that students should be pulling out of them. That's where a lot of the heavy lifting from the cognitive standpoint of what are students supposed to get out of this. The observation and leadership of or direction of that group during the problem-based learning exercise should be done by somebody who it'd be very helpful if they do kind of understand what those objectives are, but certainly know what the objectives are and can make sure that the students are following a fruitful path, and then going forward and actually being able to dig into it and get the information back. So all that heavy lifting on the part of the conceptualization of what the science is in it is going to be done ahead of time and doesn't have to be done on the fly in one of these kind of exercises. And so the scientist, whether they happen to be the person mentoring this or not, is in the room, really. I mean, their work is in the room. So
Their work is in the room, but they may not be in the room.
they may not be. That's right.
Okay.
Rich, did you want to?
Or they may be.
I'd like to follow up on this. So, Jim, that's a good question, and I think every medical school in the country is struggling with this. And one of the drivers of this is USMLE. I've just finished a 15-year term on step 2 of USMLE, and over the last 3 years, we've been writing questions that require a much greater emphasis on the foundational sciences to answer the question. So medical students know that this is going to be important for their students to revisit some basic science concepts. The models for this are 3. One is to do intercessions, and so you know, we have some intercessions up there, and it certainly is possible that in that intercession, the clinical skills intercession, there may be opportunities there where students come back that we could have some basic science sessions. Then there are what we were calling intra-clerkship sessions. So we think in discussions with Dr. John Dick, our Associate Dean for Clinical Education, and his group, we envision that medicine and surgery, since they have the least distributed model of clerkships, that is, they only have 3 sites for each clerkship, that they could do some distance learning, and we could actually have a team of a basic scientist and a clinician running a clinically based conference, being live streamed video to CPMC and the VA on a certain topic, whether it's antibiotic resistance in a patient with sepsis, run by a microbiologist and a clinician. And yes, it would require that the medicine clerkships is 8 weeks, so you'd have to repeat that session. Now, perhaps we can video record it, but I think there should be some live interaction. So, you know, there's multiple different ways to handle this, but as Rand said, the discussions have started, and I don't think there's a medical school in the country that has solved this issue, but I think that there have been discussions on this, and we're committed to having this revisiting of the foundational science in the clinical years. But we envision that we would require some basic scientists who would want to pair up with a clinician to actually have this happen in the clerkships. And since we can't have basic scientists all over the country where our students are, we envision they'd be based here, and we'd have to be modernize our approach with some video conferencing.
So one point I would say about that also is that part of the curriculum would begin in 2018. So, I mean, we do have an opportunity to do some pilots and find out what works and doesn't work. And that is somewhat innovative, because most medical schools have struggled with keeping science or introducing science into clerkship intensive times.
Go ahead.
As one follow-up question to the last one, in sitting here as a clerkship director where we have students going to 8 different clinical sites, I'm seeing that as a barrier or a problem that we're going to have to solve, because to get students to have comparable experiences, a good word that we're all familiar with, I see difficulties there.
Having had a little experience nationally on how to make things consistent across sites, I would say that the use of technology is, as Rich talked about, important. I would say your specialty probably has less national resources currently available for that. But that being said, I think one of the things we need to think about is, in addition to streaming videos and face-to-face, I mean, don't get me wrong, face-to-face education is the gold standard and what we are striving for. At the same time, these are repeated core concepts that students need to know. So there are all kinds of methods of also teaching the integration of basic science with core clinical problems that can be done through virtual cases or any other type of online learning that can be then distributed evenly to students at a variety of sites. Family medicine, for example, does a beautiful job of using Adobe Connect to have the students who are in a whole bunch of different sites around the country actually virtually be together for about 3 hours, including small group breakout sessions online. So there's a variety of ways to do this that we can still meet the similar experiences across sites, but using technology much more than we're currently doing. And I think many of you know we're closing in on hiring a director of learning and technology, and that will be a significant push into the clinical years, is thinking about all kinds of online learning and how to maximize this kind of curriculum in a dispersed clerkship setting.
I think the way I think about this, just to round out that discussion, is that, I think you're right. There are many logistical obstacles to doing this. It's not the kind of thing that sort of presents itself an easy solution. I think this is going to be a pedagogical challenge. But I think if we accept that it is important for our students to really understand these concepts, and we recognize that currently the way we do it could be improved upon, I think then we accept that we have to do what we can, knowing that in your clerkship, we would have a particular approach that fits that reality of 8 locations, whereas in medicine, where a greater number of people are in one location, it's a different approach. And on family medicine, where people are even more widely dispersed, it's another approach still. But I think we can at least improve upon what we're doing.
Well, this is a related manpower question. The students who've come into my office to do clinical rotations are beautifully prepared in basic sciences, and it's been one of the strengths of the school. Mm-hmm. And I'm really concerned that NIH funding has dropped for researchers, and we have some wonderful people here who don't have great grant support, who are terrific teachers. And I'm just wondering what kind of commitment there is on the part of Geisel now to support those people who may not have research support, but who are great teachers and really deserve to be supported to train our students.
So that's a good question. I can tell you that at my former institution, we had individuals like that were recognized as good teachers and were supported by their chairs for their role in teachers. I'm meeting with somebody on Friday to have this discussion, somebody who's in one of the basic science departments, who sees his transitioning from the lab to more in education. And I think that we're going to increasingly in the new curriculum need individuals like that who take on a greater teaching role for the reasons that we have mentioned. So I think there will be a need for those kinds of individuals. And from my discussions with Chip Shoba, I think he's serious about supporting these individuals who are really the core teachers in this new curriculum.
Hi. This is more of a philosophical question, which I've raised in the Ethics and Humanities work group, but I'm just curious, maybe it's a language issue, but I know when this diagram came out, I had kind of a visceral reaction to the word biomedical, because it seems a little bit limiting and sort of focused on biology. And I think we all know, and again, maybe it's just language, but there's the disease and then there's the experience of illness. And I guess I would make the case that there's a basic science associated with learning how to care for the patient who's experiencing the illness. And I would love to think that at this juncture, we have the opportunity to put people on those teams that include the basic scientists, the clinical scientists, and the people with expertise in humanities and psychosocial aspects of care, working together to develop maybe a core medical curriculum that's not limited to biology, but that right from the foundations of medicine through the entire curriculum, that we have those people kind of at the table looking at how is the patient's experience, how do we learn the science of dealing with that. And so I guess maybe it's just the language again, and that this is what's intended, but I would love to hear. I think this is the time where we all get to bring these different work groups together and start to figure out how do we thread together our interests and expertises to build an integrated curriculum.
Absolutely. We've already, Craig and I have talked about this. We are going to look at every case, and I know the ethics group is, and integrate part of the core curriculum that we're working on in resilience into those cases. So, for example, sleep is part of our arena. So we'll do some basic sleep kind of curriculum. But then I'm hoping that we'll have an OB case, and lo and behold, I know Tina won't believe this, but someone didn't read a tracing right because they had been up for 2 days in a row and took another call. So that allows us to constantly integrate the curriculum all through these cases. So they aren't just basic science and clinical, core clinical, and I know ethics and humanities has the same plan.
Can I ask you a question, Kathy? Are you suggesting that the name such as, excuse me, biopsychosocial model would be more applicable?
Or maybe just calling it the core medical curriculum. I think it's more important that all the people are at the table. But I think the name, it seems like a throwback to the pre-Ingle days when we thought medicine was all about only biology. And I think we're smarter than that. But I think it sends a message to people about what we're about, and so I just raise it because now is a good time to be thinking about what messages we're sending to people.
I think you raise, two fundamental points. One is just the name that will be used. The other thing, and I was wondering if you could bring up that pedal document, because as Tim said, I just want to point out something when he flashes it up on the screen. It's because during that core biomedical curriculum, we're going to be doing a lot of case-based interactive teaching. And we'll be teaching in such a manner where you might have a case that might relate to the clinical microsystems, about how do you address this problem and to deal with it in an ongoing way. But also you can see all the other components of it. But we included like ethics so that these people could be involved in the case. Whether it's a case that involves, let's say, cultural issues. So we might have a medical anthropologist, Professor Craig, come over from the college to be involved in that particular discussion. So I think what we see is that the ethics and humanities, as well as Anne and Craig and the practice resilience, is embedded in this case learning and case discussion so that those people are involved in reflecting on that case.
And then sort of reacting to the naming piece of this, I think you're right. One of the experiences I've had in venues like this is that if the diagram of the curriculum doesn't resonate with the person sitting in the chair, they don't see themselves up on that diagram in a way, it can have an unintended effect. It can sort of feel like it's excluding that person's specialty. This could be true of a name that feels too focused on clinical medicine, and then the scientist can feel, well, what about foundational sciences? And I think it can be true also if the name in some way sort of implies too narrow of a scope of clinical practice. So I know you personally as a wordsmith, and I sort of invite the group, and I know Kathy's team has invited people on a naming thing to sort of make sure we get this intention right with names. And so let's keep talking about this, and you're on the ethics and humanities group. We can work on that piece together, because I think the intention is there, but we also need to name it correctly.
I wanted to just add that currently the on-doctoring program, in addition to students just seeing patients in clinicians' offices, they do spend a lot of time exploring the patient's experience of illness, shared decision-making, some ethics. And so there is a lot of the curriculum in that on-doctoring now, which I was very impressed with when I got here, and the intent is to make that even more robust. So I think some of the things that might be missing in the biomedical curriculum per se are actually in that on-doctoring program. We could probably explain that a little better than we have it on this diagram.
Yeah, I think the on-doctoring program's great, and a lot of good stuff is already in the curriculum. I guess I was looking at this and saying it's an opportunity to integrate things that have been perceived as being kind of on the margins, and to make a clear statement that all of this is important. It's not a competition. It's just, it's a chance to thread it all together. And I just, I want to make sure that we do that as intentionally as we can.
Yeah, if the team-led, patient-centric approach that we have is done correctly, we should trumpet that so that students who are applying here know that's what they're going to get. Yeah.
I'd love to hear more when I look at that diagram and see this notion that students are also going to be doing master's work over the course of this curriculum. It's very exciting on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm sitting and thinking of this student trying to do clerkship work and also trying to do coursework at the same time. And I'd love to hear more about how you see that piece integrating in and how that is going to be staged. Are there going to be certain parts of the curriculum where, in fact, there's kind of a hiatus from the master's work to make room for the clinical work, or is this really going to be done, and how is that possible?
So the opportunity to have a sort of a curriculum in healthcare evaluation and innovation allows two opportunities. One is to provide some content for all students, and then for those students who choose to pursue the master's, to be able for them to be able to choose the pursue the MS degree and complete both degrees within 4 years. The way we've designed the framework and structure for this is to have 4 courses that all students will take over the course of 4 years. So those will be courses in measurement analysis and critical appraisal, so sort of very similar to epibiostats that they currently take, and a course in leadership, a course in microsystems design and improvement, and then a course in finance and policy. And those will be for all students. Now those students who pursue the master's will take those courses. I use the word courses because the college, you need to call them courses for the college to grant credit for the master's degree, because the master's degree comes from the college, not from the medical school. And so those 4 courses will comprise 40% of the credits toward a master's degree. The other 60% of credits we think will occur during will occur during the summertime in years 1 and 2, or what's currently years 1 and 2. So there'll be vacation in phase 1 where they'll be able to get some additional credits. And then a longitudinal master's independent study that the student will have to work on over 3 years, we think, of the curriculum. Elective time during clinical years, and partly how we envision it is, let's say there's a student, so how will you get elective for the master's, and might you double credit while you're doing clinical work? So let's say there's a student who's working with Carolyn Kerrigan at DHMC, who's a plastic surgeon, and the student's interested in going into plastic surgery, and has worked for many years, a couple of years with her on improving access in plastics clinic. Well, that student might do a 4-week plastics rotation, but spend 3 days a week in the operating room and 2 days a week focusing on their master's work. And 2 days a week over 4 or 5 weeks is going to be about 40 or 50 hours, which is what we anticipate and is sort of the bar for elective credit in the master's. Now, another student might do a plastics elective, and they might do 4 weeks and be in the operating room 5 days a week or 7 days a week, or 6 days a week with duty hours. But so we think we can be very creative, and that as students choose their independent study, they're going to be very distinct and very focused on how they choose their electives that make up the 60% to get the degree. Some students are going to focus on global health. They're going to get their elective working with Lisa Adams in Tanzania, being in the country, and have focused experiences that way. So the MS degree, the name for the MS degree is Evaluation Innovation, is a little bit broad. It's intentionally broad because what we want is the degree to create opportunities for students to pursue something that is truly of interest to them, and where they can work very closely with a faculty member and work on a scholarly project, complete these credits, and be able to feel good about having a substantive MS degree as part of their time here. It'll be a lot of work. That doesn't make it sound, but we think it is doable.
Greg, the other thing to point out, and something that I wasn't familiar with initially, is that I would say, and Ann, correct me if I'm wrong, I would say about 20% of students in each year actually take 5 years to go through medical school because they do what's called they're splitters. I didn't know what a splitter was until I came to Dartmouth, but I thought it had to do with chopping wood or something. But splitters, they do their 4th year over 2 years, and they do some scholarly work. And so the very ambitious students will be able to do this, but I think a lot of them that will want to do this master's and split the 4th year and do it over 5 years. So there'll be some flexibility there.
I have a question. It's probably in the larger document, but as I look at the core biomedical curriculum, it's very dense. And is there a summer vacation built into that, and how long is it?
Yeah, let me call up that piece of the diagram so I can show you in a little more detail. So in the core biomedical curriculum here, I think I'll use the mouse as a pointer. It would begin as it does currently in May, and then, in August, and then go through most of a full calendar year, but not the full calendar year. It would end in May, so that the students would have in the redesign curriculum, as they do now, time off in the summer to be able to engage in, Howard Hughes programs, or to take elective time as part of the healthcare evaluation, masters, et cetera. Similarly, at the end of the core biomedical curriculum in spring, we envisioned that, as they do now, the students would take some time to study for the boards, and that starting in May, June is when the students would begin the next phase of the curriculum, phase 2. Does that answer your question, Jim?
Yes.
Okay, good. Other questions, other things I can show you? Maybe you can just huck it over to Don.
Thanks. 2 quick questions. One is whether there'll be any change in admissions to go along with the change in curriculum. And the second is that I think that many of us have thought for many years that there is a characteristic of Geisel that distinguishes it from most medical schools, in addition to the presence of our expertise and interest in evaluation and innovation, and that is the rural nature of Geisel. It is one of the very few medical schools that's located in a rural area. So I was wondering whether or not the teams have thought about ways either to make up for the deficiencies of being in a rural area, but also to highlight the benefits of being in a rural area from a medical education point of view.
So let me address the first question because it's easier. Admissions. We talked about whether we ought to, in this curriculum redesign, alter the, sort of the intent of the medical education at Geisel to focus on a particular kind of a graduate. So for instance, some medical schools in their mission statement specify that they are creating physician scientists. I think Yale does this, for instance. Other institutions specifically state that they are addressing the dearth of primary care physicians in certain areas of the country in their mission statement. They graduate that kind of student. And so we were asking the question of whether the kind of curriculum that we're creating is one that should intentionally be directed toward a particular kind of student. We've decided not to do that. We think of the education here as something that should be outstanding for all students of all sorts, so that the primary care practitioner who wants to go into one of those rural communities and sort of really be not only the primary care provider, but also sort of the orchestrator of that local health system, they feel valued in this curriculum and have skills that would be unusually available to them. But similarly, the student who wants to become a physician scientist or a subspecialist in a surgical field also gets outstanding training. So our intent is to be Catholic in our education. That said, I suspect that this kind of a curriculum, which we anticipate to be distinctive, is going to attract a particular kind of student. We think that students who have a particular interest in leadership, have a particular interest in healthcare evaluation and innovation, like the idea of a close-knit community of scientists and clinicians doing a closely mentored approach, that kind of applicant is going to be more likely to come here. I think of that as something that sort of happens organically a little bit. We know that our admissions committee recruits from the very best, and we anticipate that we'll continue to be able to do that. In fact, that students recognizing that the educational approach here is, ahead of the curve is going to actually recruit even stronger applicants. About the rurality of it, though, let me pass off to one of my colleagues to say that I think one of the shortcomings of modern medical education is that it is typically centered around large academic medical centers. Just historically, that's been the case. In this area, we have the necessity, as we talked about earlier, of distributing our education more broadly, and we think it's an opportunity to sort of do a better job in medical education of recognizing that fact of modern clinical life.
So let me just take, you know, the LCME was just here, and they were also concerned about this. So, you know, I think with our community-based preceptors that do the on-doctoring and precepting, a lot of those are scattered all over New England in a lot of rural areas. I met some of them recently at a community preceptor board dinner meeting. So our students are already exposed to that, and we're going to continue that. We're also exposing our students to urban areas like San Francisco, because we believe it's important for them to have a diverse experience. We're going to get our hands slapped by the LCME because we're not doing a good job now in making sure we're offering comparable experiences. They've already told us that, so we're going to have to tighten our belts here and be much more aggressive in making sure we're having comparable experience in San Francisco and Portland, Maine, and Dartmouth and Concord and those sorts of things. So we're already gearing up for that. So we think the same strengths of the medical school now, where students have the opportunity to see patients in rural Vermont, but at the same time go to San Francisco and see medicine and surgery, will continue in the future. And we're also exploring a relationship with Mayo Clinic to have that be another site for students to go for their third-year rotations.
And do you want to talk a little bit about sort of how we'll manage that impact on life of students of those widely distributed locations of education?
Oh, okay. I was ready to talk about admissions, but okay, I'll change gears.
Feel free to do both.
Okay. I'll go ahead and say what I was going to say about admissions. In 2015, the MCAT is tremendously changing with a lot more emphasis on sociology, psychosocial issues. So this is changing the group in terms of the type of students that and how we're going to evaluate them. Second of all, at the request of the Dean and senior leadership, we went through the AAMC's holistic process, and we still have the third stage to go to, which is really the evaluation stage, looking at what we are looking for students, how we're looking at those new MCAT scores, but more importantly, their attributes and experiences and the type of student that we want. And we're just beginning to go through that process this spring. And if anyone would like to join us, we would love to have you on our working groups. In terms of making sure that the students' wellness, if you will, and I really like the word perhaps well-being and gusto for life and engagement and learning. Certainly mentors are a big part of that, and I appreciated your question earlier. You know, I think this school does a fantastic job with mentors. Our students do so well, and right now we really have a spoke model where although they have assigned mentors, they also find mentors very quickly. We have over 25 affinity groups that students join in those first 2 years and find some lifelong mentors, and I think that's going to be critically important. But also we do see an assigned longitudinal mentor, and then many of the skills that we help are hopefully going to educate the students on resilience and adaptability and so forth, I think will serve them well as they go out to these sites. We have an amazing match list. We all know that. We have amazing scores, but I've always thought that one of the reasons our students do so well in the match is because, number one, going to all these sites gives them a lot to talk about on the interview trail, but it also shows how amazingly adaptable they are to a variety of different cultures and situations.
Yeah, Don, I just wanted to say about your question about the rural nature. It presents certainly some barriers, but also some unique opportunities. Taking the kind of analogy from psychiatry and distributed neural networks, it presents the opportunity to surmount the barriers of geography and weather and few experts out in the far reaches of our catchment area, to really foster development of innovative technologies, telemedicine, and really, I think, encourages the use of respect of the medical home, but also how to work in a team fashion as an academic medical center would in its region of care. So I think the rural quality of it, I know certainly in our residency program, is it has a certain cachet. People like that attribute because it really does offer a different skill set in terms of teamwork and teamwork at a distance. And as Rich was saying, you know, our students have opportunities to work in inner city environments, and for most medical schools in the country, that's the sort of modal experience. And I think we really have that enhancement and add skiing to that, and that's a further pull.
Maybe just a last thing about that issue of distributed education that Anne has been a really strong advocate for throughout the course of the redesign is she's been wanting to make sure that we don't forget that while the students do go out to San Francisco, Portland, Northern Vermont, that nonetheless that they still feel like they're part of a home community here at Geisel. And so one of the things that we've intentionally been considering in the construction of the calendar is when are the opportunities for all of the students in a class or even multiple classes at once to come back and be together to either have an intercession or present the results of their project so that class cohesiveness is kept despite the fact that they're having these broadly distributed experiences.
Let me just add, I appreciate you raising that because I know you and I chat a lot on the bus between New York and up here about the difference between a rural and urban life. But I want to be very explicit because I really think that we ought to be embedding into our cases that we're developing, as you and I well know, about the sociological or anthropological nature of a rural community and how that affects issues such as boundary issues for healthcare clinicians when you're in dual relationships between being a clinician and treating your next door neighbor. So I think that we can really embed that into a lot of the case-based learning as part of that Easter egg hunt, if you will, in looking at a case, that's an issue that could be brought out and how that impacts on how one is caring for such people. Because, as you know, I did this book on ethics in rural healthcare professionals, and it really took off in terms of how people had not thought about a lot of these issues. So as someone who's done a lot of work on rural populations and that impact, how important that is. So I think you really struck a chord. Thanks, Don.
So I promised him only 2 minutes. But I think, Don, to answer your question from my perspective as well, as I'm going to switch my hat from medical education learning design, which includes that, to the Office of Faculty Development. And I think one of the questions you're asking that's critically important to me is potentially the only previously known as Dartmouth Medical School graduate here, is that was critically important to me as a student here, and it remains critically important to me. Some of my most important mentors were family physicians, particularly in rural areas, general pediatricians in rural areas, and I agree with you, it's part of our fabric. One of the key things we have to do, though, is make sure we can meet the LCME criteria for consistency across sites. And so the wonderful thing about having both the Office of Community-Based Education Research in mind and the use of technology, I think we can really make sure that our rural preceptors are still on par so the LCME is happy, and yet we can still incorporate our students in that critically important factor in our medical school.
So it's about 2 to 7, and I want to make sure I respect your time by getting done early. Is this a super quick question, Heiko?
Yeah, maybe a quick question. And coming full circle to the initial comments about mentorship and about the role of clinicians, I think there's currently very little time in the busy life of a clinician to teach students. And from personal experience also in our department, I know that over a few weeks, we teach SPM courses in small groups and lectures, and then that's probably the most we do during the year. And then we have those consult services where we have students, but I think the new curriculum really requires more engagement from clinicians, more focus on student education, and taking on perhaps new responsibilities. So I wonder whether you have thought about educating the educators or clinicians, or whether there's anything structurally that you think should happen for those new educators or transitioned educators to take on the new challenges.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief answer just so that we stay on time, but I think it's a really important question. So one, we envision that the spectrum of teaching roles for clinicians is going to change in the redesigned curriculum, but it should still be a broad spectrum. So I envision that there are still going to be, like today, faculty who invest substantial pieces of their time leading courses, designing the courses, being the small group faculty members, people who spend a lot of time and are supported for that investment. I also think that, like today, there will continue to be people who do an hour here, an hour there in a large group session, and then they return to their practices or their labs, and that's the extent of their investment. Another role that I think will be built out is that we're going to have team-based design of courses. And so, you might sit down with a physiologist, gastrointestinal physiologist, and sort of design together a course, sessions that neither of you may actually be physically present to deliver, because a small group facilitator will be doing that. But you'll shape the session so the students and the faculty are processing through that must get to the critical teaching that you as the course design team think are important. So I think there will be a diverse array of roles. And for those roles, Leslie Fall's Office of Faculty Development, which Rich Simons built within 35, 40 seconds of his arrival here, is essentially already doing faculty development to suit people's roles, and will expand that activity to make sure that as we sort of change our skill sets and adjust to those roles, we're ready for it. So lots of topics have come up today. Different topics came up in the lunchtime town hall, and I want to make sure that that we view today as just a beginning of the conversation. And so I want to make sure that you know that there are focus groups on each of the specific pieces of the curriculum that we've been talking about today. So if you want to dig deeper into the core biomedical curriculum or the clinical immersion training sessions, those opportunities are coming up. Also, I encourage you to visit our webpage where we have an FAQ. We also have the detailed framework document up there for your reference. We'll also post updates, announcements, videos of things like this town hall. And there's also an email address that you can use to contact us with questions or ideas that you have. This is also an opportunity, a time to signal your interest in getting involved if you're not already. As you can imagine, as the framework moves forward, if this resonates for the faculty and is consistent with what we think is the right way to go forward, we're going to need to build in those course directors and clerkship directors to build out the curriculum content. Many of you are already in leadership positions in education anyway, but this is a great time to build out that role if you're interested. One thing I want to make sure that we take advantage of is your feedback. This is one venue for learning, but we want to get your feedback on whether this is effective, what other venues would be good. And so Carrie has positioned some evaluations at the exits, and if you can just take a few seconds to fill those out, make sure we know we're suiting your needs, that would be really important. But I appreciate you taking the time this evening to come out and discuss this with us, and look forward to future conversations about it. I think we're onto some good stuff, and I think the students for the next 20 years will appreciate this kind of investment. Thanks.